My name is Rachel and I am coming to you from Sydney in Australia. I am the owner of Rare Early Child Support Services. I have been working in early childhood in Australia for 17 years now. I've done pretty much every role that is possible. I've been a teacher, I've been an educational leader, I've been a director, I've been a nominated supervisor. I've done all sorts of things. So what I'm going to be talking about tonight is how to meet the requirements of the National Quality Framework and the Early Years Learning Framework and make sure that everything is child focused and that children have a sense of agency and that they have choices amongst everything that they're doing, but also us as educators supporting them within that. So how to make sure that they are getting challenged, getting extended on things, all around the interests that they have. So as I'm going through, if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the comments below and I will get to them at the end of the session because it's quite confusing to get to them as I'm going through it. If there's any technical questions, there is somebody here from Twinkle to help out with anything that you post that's of a technical nature, but if it's to do with the actual content, we'll get to them at the end. So we're going to start by talking about what are teachable moments. So teachable moments is about bringing children into experiences by making them inviting and engaging. And a way to do that is by setting up experiences that explain to children what we would like them to do with it. So something like this, where you can see that there is pirates, there is clipboards, they've got paper, they've got pens, they've got an idea of what they're meant to be doing with it. In the middle, there's already a drawn example in there. Something like this is going to invite the children in. It's going to say to them what you would like them to do with it. It's going to say how you would like them to use it, but it also says you don't have to use it this way. There is nothing to say that the children have to play pirates with this if they don't want to. They can just draw a picture of a flower on the paper that's there. They don't have to use it in that way, but it's providing an opportunity, it's providing a suggestion. And if you've got children that are really into pirates, but they don't do a lot of drawing and writing and creative experiences and those sorts of things, this invites them to use their interest in a different way and to challenge themselves in that way. So teachable moments is about the setups that we do and the way that we invite children into it. It's also about playing alongside children. And when I say playing alongside children, I actually mean playing alongside them. So enjoying the experiences, taking your shoes off and getting into the sandpit, having a go with what they're playing with, seeing if you can stack up the blocks like they are, seeing what you can make out of the Lego. It's not sitting alongside them and asking them, what are you doing? That looks interesting. How are you doing that? Can you tell me about that? Because you wouldn't like it if you were trying to do something, if you were trying to do your documentation and somebody was over your shoulder going, why'd you write that sentence for? Or why'd you use that word? It would be intimidating and it would kind of make you shut down. So a simple way to do that is something as simple as if I'm sitting at the Play-Doh table, I like to make myself a little bowl. And then while I'm sitting there playing at the Play-Doh table, I pull bits off, I make little balls, and I put them into the bowl. And I slowly add things into the bowl. And if children are interested, then they start to engage with what I'm doing and they start to ask questions maybe. How did I make that? Can I show them how to make a ball? And it is quite challenging to actually get your hands moving in the different directions to make a ball. Some children can make consistent sized balls. Some will make smaller balls and larger balls. Some might pull off just a tiny little bit and make a tiny little ball. And then you can start to talk about size. So you can start to talk about the differences and things like that. So again, if the children aren't interested in it, it's just me showing a different way to use the resources and role modeling it. But it's not me saying, hey guys, we're all going to do this now. So again, the children have a choice. But it is challenging them and it's making them understand different ways to use the resources. Another idea for teachable moments is adding resources into the experiences that we have. So an example of this is I had a group of boys that loved to play in block corner, were always in block corner. It was their place that they were most comfortable in. It was where they liked to be. And within block corner, they would get the blocks and they would line them up on end. And one day they lined every single block up on end and they dotted animals in amongst it. And they told me that they were making a forest or a jungle. So I said to them, oh, that's amazing. Would you like some leaves for your trees? So they said, yes, we would. So I said, well, what color do your leaves need to be? So they went and they said that they needed to be green. So I went away and I got several different coloured green paper. I said, what else would you need to make leaves? And they told me that they would need to have pencil, they would need to have scissors, and they would need to have sticky tape. So I brought all of that stuff back. So I'd got them thinking about problem solving, how they were going to do it, planning ahead what sorts of things they would need. And then when I brought all of these things back, this group of boys sat there for nearly an hour and made about 200 leaves between them and stuck them on top of all of these blocks that they'd lined up on end and made them all into trees. And if I'd made them to come over and do a craft activity, I probably would have got one square stuck onto a piece of paper and that would have been it. So it's about finding ways to get the skills we want children to achieve in ways that mean something to them. So recognizing that moment where you can add in additional resources, where you can go and get something else, you can go and get some paper and pencils, you can bring out a book that links into that and provide more information, whatever it might be. And another way is actually exploring with the children, not just answering them. So when children ask questions, it's so easy to just say, oh, that's because X, Y, and Z. So if a child sees a bird's nest on the floor and says, what's this? We might quickly go, oh, that's a bird's nest. That probably fell out of the tree in the wind that we had. And I've seen a bird flying around there and there's no eggs that I can see, so it's probably empty, and we give them all these answers. Rather than saying, well, what do you think it is? And why do you think it's on the floor? And how do you think it got here? And encouraging children to use their knowledge about nests, their knowledge about trees, their knowledge about things falling down and gravity, to start to understand those sorts of things. So it's about those teachable moments where we can provide opportunities for children to build their resilience by possibly being wrong and having a chance, and that it's okay if the answer's not right, it doesn't matter. By building their sense of agency, by having the inner sense that they are going to find out this information, that it's not just going to be something that is given to them. It encourages their risk-taking, because when we talk about risk-taking, it's not always physical risks. We're not always talking about jumping off of high things and swinging across things. It can be emotional risks and it can be cognitive risks. So being confident enough to challenge ourselves. And it's also about problem solving and transferring that knowledge. So taking what we already know about things and moving that into a different context. Now, one of the best ways to provide teachable moments is to use open-ended resources. Now, when we use structured resources, generally structured resources, so something like flashcards, puzzles, games, something like that, can be used in one or two different ways. They're not generally inclusive of children with additional needs or children who are developmentally ahead in some areas but not maybe in other areas. They generally focus on one or two skills. Maybe it's social skills and patterning. Maybe it's turn taking and colours. Maybe it's shapes and colours. Maybe it's pencil grip and letters. So they tend to focus on one or two different skills, and they're often time limited. If you think about something like a jigsaw puzzle, then some puzzles take a minute to do, and once you've done them, you're finished. And other things can take a very long time to do, like some of these games that we have where children sit down and start a game of bingo or something like that. They can take 20, 30 minutes. If you've got a child who can't sit for that long, then are they able to engage with those resources? Are they able to get the same amount out of it as other children? So think about how we use resources and whether they are open-ended resources or whether they're structured resources. So thinking about open-ended resources then, which is resources that children can use in any way that they would like, and they have lots of choice and decision making within that. They're usually unlimited time. So a child can sit for 3 hours in the block area and still be challenging themselves and still be learning lots of different things and still be understanding different ways to use things. They can explore, so they can really kind of get into understanding what these resources are, how to use them, develop knowledge on them, because quite often they're there repeatedly. So things like Play-Doh, we often have that out again and again and again. And we see children initially, they just kind of squish it and they just kind of poke at it and they don't really know what to do with it. And then they might pull a bit off and realize that they can pull bits off of it and stick them back onto it. They might push something into it and realize it makes a pattern. And gradually over time, we see children develop in their ability to use Play-Doh so that they start to add and add and add and create more and more adventurous things and more challenging things. And that then role models for other children different ways they can use the resources. It also allows them to investigate, so explore the different properties of the different items that they have and how they can use them in different ways. That then in turn allows them to challenge themselves because they've got that opportunity to revisit and keep adding on to what they learnt last time. And they can start to experiment with them. So I wonder what would happen if. I worked with a little boy once and he came into the childcare service every single day that he was there for a number of weeks, possibly months, and he gathered the same blocks every time and he was building, it looked like the same construction every time that he was in there. So I started taking photos of it to see what was really happening. And what he was actually doing was he was using his experience from last time and challenging himself to make it sturdier. And his block tower got more and more rigid as it went on. It got more and more right angles in it. And the one that he finished with versus the one that he started with was much more structurally sound. And he had set himself that challenge to do that. Nobody had suggested it to him. Nobody told him that he needed to be doing that. But he had challenged himself to do that. So it's about challenging yourself. It's about children having their own outcomes of what they would like to achieve and doing it that way. I'm just going to show you some different resources and some different ways that this can be achieved. So we've got in home corner, we've all got plastic food. We've got fruits and vegetables and things like that. With this, you can do counting. You can say, how many carrots do I have? Or I'm making a recipe, I need 3 lemons. Can you please get me 3 lemons? All those sorts of things, especially if they're done in a playful way and you're playing alongside them, inadvertently adds counting into the experiences. So instead of sitting there and saying, how many lemons do I have? We're bringing it into the context of the play that's happening, but we're inviting children to look at the numeracy side of it, look at the counting side of it. You can also classify lots of different things. So maybe things that are fruits and things that are vegetables, things that grow on trees and things that grow in the ground, things that are smooth and things that are bumpy. There's lots of different ways that you can classify things in the food that you have in home corner. You don't always need to be talking about food as food. You could start to challenge the children in classifying things. And I wonder which ones of these grow on the ground, because I'm sure that a carrot grows in the ground. Do you think there's anything else? Maybe a potato, do you reckon that grows in the ground? And start to talk about those sorts of things. You could even start to talk about seeds and stuff like that. It's an excellent opportunity to start to talk about healthy eating. So, oh no thanks, I wouldn't like a slice of cake because I had some cake yesterday and it's just a sometimes food. But I'll have a glass of water please and an apple if you wouldn't mind, because that's really good for me and it's going to give me lots of energy. So those sorts of things you can use to kind of challenge yourself, to challenge the children, and to use them in a way that's going to, again, bring it into the play. So it's not just something that is being done in kind of a structured, let's talk about healthy eating, let's have a group time about healthy eating, let's play a game where we match the healthy foods together. It's done in a playful way, and it's just little comments that we make that bring it into the play but still challenge the children and extend on their knowledge. We can also add in things like vocabulary. We can label different things. We can label different items that we have. We can talk about things like rinds. We can talk about different parts of the food. We can talk about vines with grapes. There's lots of different things we can add into, again, extending the children's knowledge and challenging them in a fun way because it's something that they're already interested in because they're there and they're in home corner, but it's a playful way. And that's just talking about plastic fruits and vegetables. If you think about everything that's in home corner, there's so many different ways that you can bring in those experiences and start to challenge children. So things like using chopsticks and different types of cutlery and getting the fine motor skills happening. If you've got something like an office set up, then you can bring in using phones, dialing different phone numbers, typing things into the keyboard, and all the literacy skills as well. So there's lots of different ways to achieve this. And that was just one simple example using the fruit. Another way to think about challenging children is something as simple as these chain links. So a simple baby's toy, and just thinking about different ways you can use them and different sorts of things that the children can learn from them. Now, obviously, just looking at them, you can see that they've got different colours, so you can start to talk about colours. They also have different textures on them. So you can start to talk about textures, and you can see that there is textures in there, and you can talk about bumpy and smooth and those sorts of things. Now, in terms of other things you can do with them, there's resilience, because how do I get them stuck together? How do I disconnect them? How do I connect them? And you might have a child who sits there for ages trying to work out how to do that. So we're challenging their resilience and perseverance, that we're not always going to do it for them. And I also have used these with children, and a little boy sat there for 3 minutes just trying to get them together. And he did not want any help. He was like this: I don't want any help, I'm doing it myself. So there was lots of different ways that you can use this. You can also join a few together and start to bring in music and shaking and patterns and rattling and stopping and starting and all those sorts of things in there as well. You've also got the fine motor element that you're bringing in. And if you've got really little children, like my little Charlie here, then you can bring in gross motor as well. So what I did was I put a whole bunch of them onto one link to make it heavy. And I handed them to her because she was already playing with them, so the interest was already there. And by doing that, I challenged her fine motor skills because it was heavy in her hand. And I also challenged her gross motor skills because she didn't tip forwards. She stayed sitting upright even though she was weighted forwards now and it was heavier. So there's lots of different ways that you can challenge children. It doesn't always mean that you're going to be asking them questions. It doesn't always mean that you're going to be saying, what are you doing and how can I make this stronger, and how do you find that out, and what do you think will happen if we do this? With young children, it can be as simple as providing them different resources that challenge them. So providing them things to use in a different way that is going to challenge them as they play. Now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about loose parts, because I love loose parts. I think they're great. I think they're such a holistic way to play with children. I think they challenge children in a number of different ways, and it is actually possible to bring every single skill that we want children to do into loose parts, depending on what we use as our loose parts. So I'm just going to talk about a few different types of things that loose parts helps us to achieve, and give you some examples of how we can achieve that. So the first one is texture. So when we're talking about loose parts, we can have things that are fuzzy. We can have things that are spiky. We can have things that are furry. So there's lots of different textures we can bring into loose parts, and that challenges children in themselves to explore textures and to start to see which ones they like and which ones they don't like, and also to bring in the sensory element to their sensory diet, because a lot of things that we touch these days are plastic and are smooth and are fairly straight. So there's not always a lot of things that we're challenging our senses with. And by using loose parts, especially natural loose parts or craft items and things like that, we can bring in lots of different textures. Another thing that we can do with loose parts is we can bring in the natural elements. Now, it is as simple as having a look on the floor and finding some sticks. They can be added to your loose parts. Now, this one I found on the beach. It is driftwood because it's nice and smooth, which then adds a different conversation starter to children as they're playing with this. You can add something as simple as rocks. Now, this one's quite heavy, which then adds a different element because you've then got the weight with it. So it's not just always giving children light, easy things. This is that risk-taking element as well, that they could drop it, they could hurt their toe. But if we don't give them things that are going to challenge them, then how will we know that they can actually problem solve what to do with this and use it in a safe way? And especially if we're supervising and we're playing alongside them, then it's about managing those risks. So there's lots of different natural elements you can use. There's leaves, anything that falls off of trees, seeds, anything like that. Now you can bring in culture as well. A way to do that is something as simple as this, to use as a mat underneath your resources that you're using, an actual cultural piece of fabric. So again, it's not saying we have to talk about the artwork that's on there, we have to talk about Indigenous Australians. It's saying that we have the opportunity to, if you would like to. So the whole beauty of open-ended resources is that it's not something that is done to children, it's something that's done with children. And as they suggest things and as they show an interest in things, we go along with them for the ride. and we see if we can bring some other children along with us as well to extend on their interests and challenge them with things. There's also fine motor. Now, a lot of times when it comes to fine motor, we talk about things like threading and weaving and things like that, or it's with a pencil or a fine brush and those sorts of things. But lots of our loose parts are small pieces. They're small, they're tiny. So just playing with these is developing our fine motor, because we're having to pick up little things and manipulate little things and move little things around. So it doesn't always have to be a fine motor activity. It can be just thinking about the size of the objects that we use within other things. And if you've got small children, younger children, then as they're using big items, they tend to pick them up with their fingers and move them around that way as well, but they're quite heavier in comparison to the size of their hand. So they're challenging themselves that way. Another thing is patterns. It's really easy to bring patterns into loose parts, whether it's formal patterning. So you could maybe blue, yellow, those sorts of things. Or even something as simple as, again, this is just an idea of a mat that you could use with the children. And this comes from a fabric shop. So it's just got their sample colors on it. This would be really easy for children to pattern inside of. So they could use the squares as an idea for laying out things as a pattern. They could also start to pattern colors and things like that in it, because you can see that there's colors already in it. You can create your own mats. You don't need to have something like this. You can actually get a piece of cardboard or some canvas and put things on it yourself, so that that creates a mat for children to use and invites them to do patterning. And patterning doesn't always have to be the structured patterning. It could be things like making spirals. It could be looking at symmetry and using mirrors to look at symmetry. It could be using lots of natural objects to make circular patterns that go out and out and out. So there's lots of different ways to do patterns. It doesn't have to be just stock standard patterning. Another thing you can do is you can classify. Now, there is so many different ways to classify, just like there's so many different ways to pattern, because you can do things that are spiky, things that are smooth. You can do things that are big, things that are small, things that you like, things that you don't like, things that you could find around the house, things that you could find out in nature. And children will tend to classify themselves. They'll tend to draw their own things that they're interested in into the area that they like them. And some children will classify objects before they actually start playing with them. It's part of the exploration and investigation. So to get to understand them and to get to know them, they might group all the rocks together and all the shells together and all the sticks together. And that allows them to see what they have there. It allows them to see what they have in front of them and how they can use that. And then from there, they go and use those resources however they would like to. So some children are classifiers anyway. That's their natural way of exploring things. Other children might need some like boxes with holes in them to suggest that they want to classify things. Others might need you to role model it alongside them. There's lots of different ways to use classification with the children, and there's lots of different ways to engage them in this. Another thing that you can very easily bring into loose parts is numeracy. So any sort of loose part that you can find that has numbers on it. So these are just little ones that I got off eBay. They're really great to use with the children. It's also things like you can use a dice with the children. There's also ways that you can just get rocks and put your own numbers onto them. So I've got dots and numbers so that the children can match them together, and it provides another opportunity if they would like to. So it's just about thinking about ways that you can do these sorts of things, thinking about ways you can challenge the children with the objects that they have there. The older the children are, you can start looking at adding and subtracting, grouping in numbers, so counting by fives maybe, lots of different things like that. In terms of language and literacy, it's also another thing that is really easy to bring in, because one simple way is just add something with a face. So anything that has a face on it, children tend to start talking for that and start talking on behalf of that object. So you start to increase the language by adding something with a face, because children will start to have a conversation with whatever it is. And it's quite simple to draw faces onto rocks and things like that as well. You can also use items that have letters on them. So I've got some Scrabble tiles, some cookie cutters, Lots of different things that you can use that have letters on them. You can also use your loose parts to challenge children by actually writing letters. So these are little pieces of coral, and you can actually, while you're playing alongside the children and while you're playing with them, you can actually use the letters, use the pieces to start making your name, maybe making somebody else's name, and providing an opportunity for the children to think of how to use the resources differently. Again, they don't have to, but it's providing an opportunity to challenge the children and to use it in a different way. When it comes to loose parts, it's a brilliant idea to role model. So playing alongside the children in a way that challenges them to use them differently, like things like the letters. Another example of that is I have little cardboard boxes, and I put a length of chain into one of the cardboard boxes, and I closed it and I shook it to show that I could make a shaker. I handed that to a little boy that I was playing with, and he opened it and the chain fell out. He then sat there for the next 3 to 5 minutes trying to get the chain back into the box and trying to put the lid on top of it without the chain falling out again. So every time he got the chain in, he would turn it on its side to put the lid out and it would fall down. So he gradually tilted it less and less and less. And he started to understand how to use the resources and how to problem solve it for himself. He also didn't want any support from me. So you can start to see that there's resilience going on. You can start to see there's problem solving and a sense of agency that he wants to do it for himself. He doesn't want any help. He's in charge of this. He's attending to a task for a very long time, and he's developing his fine motor skills because he's trying to work out how to manipulate those sorts of things together. So all of this is going on in such a simple activity, but he wouldn't have thought to do that if I hadn't have role modelled that I put it into the box first to show that you could be shakers. And he didn't want to use it in the way that I was doing it. He was just interested in putting it in and out of the box. And that's okay too. I was just giving an idea of some things you could do. So the more that you play alongside children and the more that you challenge them to use resources in a different way can lead to things that stand out, that are documentation worthy, because they are something that is impressive, that the child is really challenging themselves to achieve that task. It's also thinking about the way you set things up. So being creative in your setup, challenging children to actually use different resources in different ways. So an example of that is I set out a whole collection of resources of loose parts. And these are bigger pieces, as you can see here, they're big pieces. They don't always have to be little pieces for older children. For younger children, you can use big pieces. So it's safe for them to use, and there's no choking hazards and things like that. Now, by stacking 2 of these cotton reels on top of each other, to put a straw into it that wasn't kinked over at the top, that was just straight, it sunk quite low down and only a little bit was sticking at the top. So by actually by putting the straws that were bent over the top and were sticking at the top of the cone, it challenged the child to think about different ways to use the straws. Now, when he actually came to putting the straw into the cone, he hadn't bent it, so it went right down inside. So I showed, using one of the ones that I had done as an example, that it needs to be bent at the top. So he had to problem solve how to bend the straw, and he ended up bending it in a U shape, but that was how he bent the straw, and it stuck in and it did fall inside. So it's about, again, providing opportunities in the way that you set things up that provoke children to think about what they're doing. It provides them opportunities to challenge themselves, because I know that those straws don't go in straight, but all the ones that I put out on the mat were straight. So it provides an opportunity for them to problem solve how they're going to get it in without it slipping all the way down, by looking at what they've got there as an example, which is a bent one. So just setting up inviting and challenging ways says that we want the children to challenge themselves. And it's also about allowing time. So we want to allow time, we want to allow repetition. We don't want to put out loose parts and say, oh, they went everywhere, they didn't use them very well, I don't think we'll use them again. Because they went everywhere because the children were exploring them. They were investigating them. If you think about the first time that we give a child paint, what do? They make brown. They mix all the colours together and we end up with brown. Why? Because they don't know that that happens. The more children start to use the resources and the more that they become familiar with the end results if they do things in a certain way, the more they then challenge themselves to not do that. Because I want to use blue, I don't want brown. And if every colour ends up brown, then I can't paint a blue sky. So I won't mix them together because I don't want that end result. So it's the same with things like loose parts. If we only give them to them once, and they put everything everywhere because that's their way of exploring them, and we never give them to them again, next time we put them out in 6 months' time, the same thing will happen because they haven't developed an understanding of how to use it. If you think about the way children use Lego, the first time they use Lego, they maybe put 2 pieces together or kind of find 3 yellow things and just kind of, yeah, I'm that, and off they go. If you've got children who use Lego a lot and are very familiar with Lego, they make these fantastic creations, and they actually start to plan first when they sit down. They've already got a plan in their head of what they want to make because they know what works, what doesn't work, what they like, what they don't like. So the more we can provide children lengths of time to play with things and put them out again and again and again, and ourselves as educators just ride the wave of they are challenging themselves, they are understanding, they are exploring, they are experimenting, they will get they will become more constructive with the things, they will become more creative, they will become expert at using the resources in lots of different ways, then it benefits the children because they then start to challenge themselves and extend on themselves. Now, the beauty of all of this and all of these open-ended resources that I've just talked about is that they help you with documentation because you start to see the learning in everything. You start to see the learning in something as simple as where do carrots come from, talking about it in home corner. You start to see the learning in something as simple as putting chain links together and how hard that is to do. And if a child doesn't want your help, the resilience that they have to try and achieve that. You start to see the learning in children wanting to do balls in Play-Doh and talking about bigger and smaller, and them challenging themselves to actually make the balls and maybe explain to a friend how to make the balls, transferring that knowledge that they have to other people. So there's lots of different ways that using open-ended resources and playing alongside children and being there to support them can help you with your documentation, because you also start to see things that are amazing that you might not have seen. So instead of watching things from a distance, if you're right there, things like that little boy wanting to get the chain into the box is an amazing piece of documentation. And I was right there because I was the one that kind of role modeled and instigated the whole thing, and I was there supporting him through it. Whereas if I had just seen from a distance that he'd got a chain into a box, I might have just written a different piece of documentation. So it's about acknowledging those teachable moments, being there in the moment and being ready to have those teachable moments, and also wanting to challenge children to extend on their learning and to make that learning meaningful and valid. Because the more creative you can be, the more creative children will start to be, because we give them ideas. We share our knowledge with them and we challenge them to do things in a different way. So that is the end of the presentation. I'm hopefully going to go through some questions if I can work out how to do this. Thank you for those of you who came along and joined in. If you do have any questions, as I said, feel free to pop them into the questions box, not questions box, wrong program, the comments box down below. And if you're interested in anything and you want to know more about things like that, loose parts play, anything sort of that stuff, what I do through my company is I do a lot of training workshops and a lot of training webinars as well. So online training sessions that are run by me, and you can do them anywhere, from home, from work. If you can't make them on the time, you can do them as a recording later, and you will get a certificate of attendance for those ones. So if you are interested, head over to my website, www.rare.support, and have a look on there. And yeah, if you have any questions, all my contact details are on there as well. I will finish now. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you all for your nice comments. Goodbye.